Hello, Isaac.
Hello, Rabbi. Good afternoon.
Flying through the Beatitudes.
Aren't they so rich in meaning? Aren't they so rich in meaning? In fact, I've been dreaming. I've been thinking about them all day. I can't. I just find them to be so full of meaning in the sense that, it's not new. It's taken it's taken aspects in the Old Testament, as in the Torah and the prophets, and it puts us it gives us a new life. It's said in a way which makes it come alive to me personally.
So rich in meaning that we generally can't get to the bottom of it. I always think it's funny. I told you how it seems to me that there might be 10 Beatitudes. Some people say 8. I think St. Augustine says that there's 7, and he says 1 is double because he likes 7 being a holy number. So it's always interesting to see how people read these. Okay.
So I like what he said about when we started chapter 5. He drew these parallels between Jesus going up on the mountain. He sat down, his disciples came to him, and then the people were around him. And he drew parallels between this and Exodus 17, I think we did Moses being up on the mountain, and Aaron and the priest were in between, people who were below them. I'm hoping at some point we can look at, so we've described the comparisons between Moses and Jesus, in the context of these Sermon on the Mount, or in the context of the 10 Commandments. At some point, maybe at the end, we can discuss, do you see the differences between the commandments which Moses gave, the 10 Commandments, and and these 10 or 8 or 9 commandments?
Yeah, 100%. We mentioned some of the differences, but one that I think is really important. I think if you ask a Jew or if a Christian goes, what is the import of having 10 commandments? When you look at the Bible and you see in Exodus, there's hundreds of laws, and in Deuteronomy, there's hundreds of laws, and in Leviticus, there's hundreds of laws. Why would anyone ever single out 10 laws as being more important? Because that seems to undermine the whole system. Imagine America, I said, don't kill, but on another set of laws will say, don't steal money. So I think the whole idea of having different levels of laws, the one being more important than the other, it seems to be an undermining to the general legalistic system. So much so that a lot of 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th century rabbis, they really focus on why would 10 commandments exist? So for example, one of them will say, well, all commandments really fit into them, because if it fits in them, then they're all equal. But it really creates this unevenness that it's unclear why it happens. But for me, it has to do with, this is the revelation, this is the theophany, and this is how I see the Sermon on the Mount, that you kind of, when you are trying to either start your religion, you kind of put a peg in the ground, and you say, here are the fundamental teachings, and while there might be a million more teachings, there might be different teachings, if you kind of get this, then we can get started. When you want to convert to when you want to convert to a religion, depending if it's a proselytizing religion or not, but most religions would probably hope that you would have some sense of what the religion is before you go. And I don't know if you imagine Christians as converting into Christianity, or just most Christians just see a theology of a displacement of the Jewish people. But if you see that there's supposed to be a transition between A, B, then you should maybe imagine that there's some form of conversion, some form of change. Like, John the Baptist, when he was baptizing, that was meant to be I think a moment in time, that there's a stoppage of the past and there is a beginning. So to here, I look at the Beatitudes as that kind of revelation moment where those people, the disciples, before they're getting healed, they're having conversations, a couple of speeches, but now here's the fundamental teachings of the religion.
And on the topic of Moses, I'm surprised that the evangelists did not, in terms of prophecy, the evangelists did not list the prophecy from Moses. Moses said, "The leader who will come after me," right? When Moses is about to pass away, he gives us this prophetic statement, right? That in the years to come, God will bring a leader after me, and you should obey to him, and blah blah blah.
I don't know what you're referring to right now. Okay, I know where it says leaders will come after me that will lead you astray and you should kill those people. I know those verses in Deuteronomy. I know the end of Deuteronomy where it says there never will arise ever again another prophet of Moses' stature. I know that verse at the end, but I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to.
Okay, let me look this up. I for some reason thought it's very well known, but I'll circle back to you on the exact verse.
They say there will be prophets. Moses says there'll be people after me. And he says, but if they change anything, you should execute them. Okay. Anyways, you can look that up. Happy to talk about that another time. Definitely Christianity and Islam have to take that last verse, the last last chapter of Deuteronomy that's saying there's never going to be a prophet of Moses' stature. They have to either say grammatically that's not what it means, or have to say that was a corruption of the text, or something along those lines. Okay, anyways, let's get started. Let's read one and see if we get through it. I think that'll probably be enough today. But we'll see.
The Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 5, verse 9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God.
Okay, so this is really interesting because I think this is the first one where we see that there's meant to be an active participation of you doing something. Pure in heart, you're not doing anything. Merciful, you're not doing anything. Hunger, thirst. Meek, mourning, and spirit. None of them are you doing anything. If this translation is correct, and we have this idea of peacemakers, this seems to be someone who actively has to leave their comfort zone and has to go do something. So I think it really opens up the, sorry, would you like to say something?
Yeah, now we discussed, right? 5:6 was also active. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. The ones before that were just a state of being. This was a state of doing, as in you thirst.
Well, I mean, if you're hungering for and thirsting for righteousness, I would not say that's an active thing. I think that's like a place where you are. That's something like, hi, I want a better world. So I don't think that's anything I actively do. As opposed to a peacemaker, it means a person who makes peace.
Okay. So
I'm happy to hear the other side. If you think,
yeah, I think
more active participation.
In the context of 5:6, in the context of 5:6. So yeah, so I don't think so. In this context, I don't think hunger and thirsting it happens to us, but it's also we hunger and we thirst. I think I read this as in he was trying to use hunger and thirst as a poetic device to represent that thirst. And so yes, right, in a sense, hunger and thirst happens to us, but he's also saying that people should consciously actively seek out works righteousness, and he emphasizes that by using hunger and thirsting. But besides the point, anyway. But in terms of peacemakers, yeah, in a sense, this is more directly active, as in something they're doing. But it's also from a state of being that they're doing something.
I think it opens up the question that we could very easily ask. When I say peace, there's generally two attitudes that one could have towards peace, aside from like the Gandhi versus the fighter for peace. I think you could say that peace is a consequence of a reality, or peace is an eternal drive of an ethereal concept that you're trying to execute. So on the first one, where it's something that it's not something you're striving for, just a reality. If I have peace, what does that mean? I think it's a very important question, especially when you keep in mind the word peace in Hebrew very famously is shalom. The word shalom comes from the word wholeness. And the idea is that if you have peace, it's a play in English, that you're not missing any pieces of the thing. There's peace because there's a wholeness to it. For example, in Hebrew, if you pay someone, that means you owe them $4 because you're trying to exchange money. So if you owe them, you're making them whole by giving them this $4. So you are shaloming them. You are piecing them. So I think it's a really interesting idea. Like when we say that in the Beatitudes that we're supposed to be blessed are the peacemakers, what does it mean to be a peacemaker?
Peacemaker. I meant to ask you that. What is meant to be a peacemaker?
Well, I think we have these different concepts of peace in English, even let alone in like the idea of when a country is at peace. For example, we say that the best peace is between, strong borders make good friends, and et cetera, et cetera. A lot of times when we think of peace, we think of non-bellicose militarism, that naturally they'd be at war, but we're at peace because we're not fighting. But I don't think that anyone would say that's a really good definition of peace.
Okay, so what's meant by peacemaker in this context?
Well,
who's a peacemaker?
So that's a good question, because I think that we're starting that it does seem that a lot of the Beatitudes refer to, I guess, someone that you could find on the street, someone who acts merciful, someone who is poor in spirit. And I think when you say that the peacemakers, it just seems, if I had to like go for a more literal interpretation, it's that not someone who is able to execute peace, to accomplish peace, but a person who seeks to right the wrongs of the universe, to connect to people. A lot of times in Jewish tradition, we think of Aaron. Aaron was called a peacemaker in Jewish tradition because famously, whenever there are two people fighting, this is a cute story. I wasn't going to say this, but if he knew a husband and wife are fighting, he would go to the husband and lie and say, oh, your wife is sorry, she wants to get back. And then you go to the wife and say the same thing. And that's viewed as like the epitome of a peacemaker, someone who will kind of do what it takes to accomplish peace, to make people come together. And that's
But
what.
yeah, that stands, well, thank you for sharing that, but that stands in direct contrast to Moses. Moses was in three cases where two of them were fighting. He tried to bring in, so he tried to bring in peace by executing judgment. By
Moses
saying,
is an intermediate. Moses is what we call an intermediator. He goes and tries to deal with people's issues, but he's not always successful. So if you look the first three stories that we hear of Moses, of him being born during his course of life, is that he intervened between a Jew and a Jew, between a Jew and a Goy, and then at the well between a non-Jew and a non-Jew. And each of them, one he leads them killing someone, one leads to him fleeing, and one leads to a wife. So when he intervenes, it's not always a positive or inherently negative outcome. So I think generally we don't view Moses as so much a peacekeeper as maybe someone who's attempting to get into other people's lives for the benefit of them. But again, it's a good question. He's generally not viewed as a peacemaker as much as Aaron. Even when you think of the golden calf, one of the greatest sins from a biblical perspective, what was he doing? He was trying to delay until Moses came down after 40 days. And he tried to kind of just, let's make a holiday for God and let's see if I could delay these people. And he makes a golden calf. It seems like that, if anything, was this tactic in order to try to make people kind of be on the same page and kind of get along without trying to make a riot. According to certain sources, certain Midrashic sources, he already saw an execution of someone who wasn't able to kind of carry out their whims as a leader. So it's just interesting that the idea of a peacemaker in the situation is someone who I think is not someone who we view as meek. It's not someone who we view as merciful. It's not someone who's really in any of these categories. It's not someone who's naturally a pacifist. Because a pacifist, I think, is the opposite of a peacemaker. It's someone who I like Gandhi. I don't view as a peacemaker. He's someone who's trying to change the world specifically by certain attitudes and trying to lead by example. But he wasn't going to intervene in the way that you describe Moses or the way that I'm describing Aaron. So I think this is the first time that we see that people have to be revolutionary. They have to be more like Jesus. They have to go try to change the world, as opposed to the person who's poor in spirit. There's no reason to believe that person's changing the world. There's no reason that how does he get into kingdom of heaven?
So when you say change the world, what do you mean? Could you clarify?
To make peace. I don't need to. I don't need to make up ideas here. Whatever you think make peace is. There's different models of making peace. Whatever that means. I would say there's an active participation in order to change the world. And again, I think peace has to do not with non-militants, which is the way that we see it in the world today. It has to be with a sense of wholeness, which is the way that we see in the Hebrew word, that you're able to make people feel whole with the world and have a sense of serenity, tranquility with themselves and the world.
Do you have an example of someone who's done that? Now, Aaron, as you discussed, right? This resulted in the big sin.
I do it with my kids all the time. So I think the example that we generally see is Aaron, that someone who leaves their comfort zone.
But he didn't do a good job, right? He didn't do a good job. I mean, we end up with the golden calf, and that's idea. It said it's not the right thing to do, and that was one of the biggest sins.
Well, again, I use that as a backup example, but generally in the Midrashim, the stories, he's viewed as the person par excellence. Like, for example, when you look at Korach, and the Korach is kind of viewed as the ultimate divider in biblical tradition. He's the guy who said that Moses, you shouldn't be leader. Aaron, you shouldn't be Cohen. We should be more egalitarian about it. We should be more pluralistic about it. We should try to make sure that everyone is holy. Everyone's on the same page. And then we find out that maybe not everyone's holy and not everyone's on the same page.
I'm surprised. See, Abraham, Isaac, they both lie. I mean, again, there were places where they wanted to be in peace with their enemies, and so they lied about
the famous story with Abraham and Lot, where there's negativity, and they say, whatever way you go, I'll go the opposite way, which is, again, I would call not a peacemaker as much as that's a treaty maker. A person who's saying, like, how can we make sure we live side by side, literally, without fighting?
Yeah, aren't we splitting hairs now? Peacemaker, treaty maker. I mean,
a peacemaker is someone who changes the way that you live. A treaty maker is someone who allows you to live side by side with your enemy. It doesn't make a friend out of your enemy. Okay, there's a famous rabbinic text. I thought you would like it. It's actually said as part of prayers on a Friday night. So it was in my head. So I'll read it to you. I generally, I said it a good 10,000 times in my life, and I don't know exactly what it means, but it definitely has a lot of overlap with what we're talking about. So I'll read it to you. It's from the Talmud, tractate Brachos 64a. Rabbi Lazar, in the name of Rabbi Hanina, says, Torah scholars or students of scholars increase peace in the world. So generally this is viewed as almost like a sarcasm, a joke, because there's no one who creates more controversy than rabbinic leadership. But putting aside the sarcastic, sardonic comments, Talmud, Torah scholars increase, or rabbis increase peace in the world. Okay, so now we're going to have a model, at least there, what peace means. And then it brings the verse. Here's the verse that proves it. The verse, of course, is from our favorite book, Isaiah, chapter 54. And the verse says, 54:13, if you want to look it up. And all of your children will be students of God, and your children will have abundant peace, will have lots of peace. So generally people say that, well, maybe the reason that you will have lots of peace is because you're students of God. That would be a one read. Another read is that there's people who are students of God, and separately, you could also be a person who your children could also increase peace, that they go side by side. But what's really interesting about this text is the next line. I'll read to you, and I've always struggled with this line. So in general, I feel like we don't so often talk about hermeneutics of first century Jews and second century Jews, which is something that I'm personally very interested in. And I think this is something that Jesus is specifically interested in, like how can we use a verse to support ourselves? So I think the hermeneutics of first and second century Jews are very important. So here's what it says. When the verse says, and your children will be students of God and your children will have abundant peace, don't read the word children. Children's the wrong word to translate it. The word child and the word build in Hebrew come from the same word. A son is a ben, like Benjamin, and a builder is a bonem. Most likely they're playing the same word, that a son or a child builds your line, and so too a builder builds your buildings. It's kind of builds. So the rabbis, Rabbi Lazar says in the name of Rachlina, don't read this as sons, but rather read it as your builders. So it's not that your sons are your children are the people who are the students of God, and your children will have abundant peace. Rather, your builders. And guess who your builders are? The rabbis. So what they're saying is that you might think your hereditary lines are the ones that will be able to be connected to God inherently, but no, they're saying that through active involvement, by having a mentor and by having a disciple, you'll be able to make sure to have peace in the world by having that connection to people who have connection to God. So I think it's really interesting that peace is turned on its head. Peace is not something, at least in this text, that you can naturally access. Really only through connecting through God's chosen people, let it be, his prophets, his children in this case, or in this case, in the rabbinic text, as rabbis, that's the only way that you could figure out what peace is. And I think this adds like an amazing element. Peace is not something that you could figure out. It's not something that you can access. A peacemaker is not someone who anyone could be on the street. If you just intervene, it's not good enough. It's someone who actually has a direct access of line to God, is able to be exegetically interpret the text, and able to kind of spread it through mentorship and discipleship. And I think that really opens up some possibilities over here about when we say blessed are the peacemakers, because peacemakers would be, in this case, the leaders, the people who have access to God. Yeah.
Would Paul be a peacemaker?
I don't know.
Now, based on what based on what he describes, so based on how we define peacemaker, as in, to make the world a better place, you can't access peace. You have to go through, again, in this case, based on the text of there, it's through the.
Any question you ever ask me about Paul, I can't even tell you if Paul is a Christian according to Christianity. Paul comes along and really takes whatever the messages of the synoptics, and he definitely either authentically interprets them or turns them on their side. So I think Paul is a very difficult person to analyze when you're looking at Christianity, because he's not really part of the foundation of Christianity. He's only part of the foundation because we say he is. Imagine if we say Christianity's foundation stops after synoptics. I think that would be an authentic perspective. Imagine you look at the Church of James in Jerusalem. They don't view Paul. So whenever you bring Paul in, I don't know what to tell you. Yeah, Paul does. He both brings good and brings bad.
What about Peter? Simon Peter. right? The first disciple.
Yeah, I think they're the more classic examples of people who at least I can't tell you how much they're able to authentically give over Jesus' message, but I mean we see the same idea with Islam, where you have that after Muhammad died, who are his successors, and where you have a Shia and Sunni kind of break into two groups, and one group saying I'm the real successor, you say you're the successor, and as historians or academics or as believers of faith, you kind of get stuck. You just got to kind of pick your framework that you want to work in. So even Peter, James, Paul, Mary, whoever you want to say, a lot of times it's like you're kind of choosing your own poison for the kind of framework. I view like for the end of that first century Judaism as almost Christianity as a bifurcation between like James versus Paul. That there's like this Church of Jerusalem that's kind of trying to be Jewish and kind of saying this is the way to be Jewish now. And Paul said that might be the way to be Jewish, but this is the way to be Christian. So I feel like that dichotomy is not for me or you to kind of like decide. It's for us to just observe. So, if we ever read like the Pauline letters, I think we would have be able to look at Matthew and see a very, very different text.
Mm-hmm. So what about Peter? Okay, could you clarify on Peter? I mean, Paul, I can see he doesn't fit this model of peacemaker, but what about Peter? Peter is not Paul. He's very different. He's one of the first disciples. So, like, would you be opposed to calling him a peacemaker? Does he fit this model of a peacemaker?
Well, again, like I don't, I don't know who is like, if I saw a person who's poor in spirit on the street or knew them well, I feel like I'd feel uncomfortable to call someone poor of spirit or meek. So when I hear the word peacemaker, I feel that the Beatitudes are just trying to tell us that there is some active involvement on the part of people, and it's not just a passive experience.
I see. And this active involvement, you're saying it's not so much to bring peace, but then you're saying this is an active involvement as in doing what?
Well, again, I think that's the question about what it means to be an accomplisher of peace. And that's what, again, like I'm not here to define. I think the text always allows for us to have this ambiguous relationship and to kind of, again, like I think it's really interesting that if you kind of took a checklist out and tried to find someone who identified each of the Beatitudes, that's a mean person probably. You wouldn't want to be friends with that person in the street. This is the first one where I think is unconditionally, I think somewhat more positive. But I think that what's interesting about it, that we keep talking about how all these are inherently a little bit subversive. The peacemaker, by definition, is someone who's going against the grain. He's saying that these two people are fighting, and I'm going to intervene. When I talk about Aaron being a model of a peacemaker, it meant that there was like this dialogue that was happening between two people that was failing, and these people could not accomplish a peace without an intervention. So the person who is intervening inherently is going against the grain, being annoying, trying to make sure to bring other people together that wouldn't have naturally done that.
So I find Aaron to be a very hard model to follow, because what he brought was a calf, right? If he had done something good, fine. Like if we had these two competing people, and like
there's like a lot of stories, and like in rabbinic texts, he's just the model of this, and there's a lot of stories around that. So like, it's not important about if Aaron is or not. I was using Aaron as the golden calf as an example that even if you feel that is inherently a failure, which I totally get, and Judaism and the Bible view as a failure, it still was an attempt at trying to kind of like, calm the people down. That's all I was noting.
What about Joseph?
So Joseph, I view as the epitome of a leader.
Yeah.
By being able to kind of take his future into his own hands. Okay.
Amen.
Okay. So one thing that I think comes up throughout the rest of the synoptics, and specifically in this gospel, is the end of this phrase, for they will be called children of God. I think we see specifically Christians feel very uncomfortable with this phrase, because generally when you think of child of God, a lot of times if you think of Jesus as being the child of God, that means that other people are a child of God. If everyone's a child of God, then no one's a child of God. And I think what we see sometimes, specifically in Matthew, is that Jesus refers as all the crowds as the children of God. I think a lot of times people identify just because everyone is from the line of Adam, and Adam would be like kind of viewed as the person that is the father of humanity, that we're all children of God. And it sets up this really uncomfortable dichotomy about what is the difference if I am a child of God and he's also literally a child of God, then what is it like maybe he's just symbolic and I'm little, what's the difference? And I think this is something that if you look throughout history, like even Martin Luther felt very uncomfortable with this verse, because he realized that this leads to almost this kind of Christian heresy that this opens the door to.
Okay. So what's like, why can't we accept that we're all children of God? Like, why does it have to be only some and not the others? Why,
I don't
like,
personally have a problem with it. I'm just noting that
yeah.
if someone is literally a child of God and someone is not literally a child of God, and they both call themselves a child of God, that's a little bit offensive and annoying.
Okay, but this is not literal, right? Child of God meaning it's not that God is a biological dad. That's not how this verse
Well,
means. It
I think
means
what happens is that Christians, that they noted that if it's very nice of you to kind of selectively say that this is literal and this is not literal from your own personal perspective. But I think historically, when people come to this, they don't feel that there's this ability to be so gung-ho about like saying this is literal, this is not literal. And if you look at the early church fathers, they absolutely took these Beatitudes as literal. They absolutely looked for the poor in spirit. They absolutely looked for a peacemaker. They said this refers to this. So I think you're kind of putting your modern hat on and say, well, you know, Jesus did a lot of symbolic and non-literal things. But so I'm just saying this verse really opens the door for like this uncomfortable conversation. So I think though, it also opens the door for us to say, okay, putting aside Adam, putting aside other people, what does it mean to be a child of God? So even when you look at this verse that I quoted from Isaiah, where just looking at all your children will be students of God. So we have this idea of child of God, we have this idea of students of God. So what does it really mean when it says in this verse, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the child of God? Why is this any more the child of God than the meek, than the poor of spirit? Why, you know, we keep trying to understand why it says this person gets the kingdom of heaven, this person gets to inherit earth. So why would this person be further identified more so than you and me or than anyone else as a child of God?
Could it be back your point? Like, could this mean that sons of God meaning as agents of God? That because these peacemakers, they actively participate in this world to bring about God's kingdom, that they are agents of God in this context, meaning sons of God. So I don't mean sons as literally.
I think that makes a lot of sense. We also have this idea sometimes that God has many names, as you know. One of the names of God is peace, is shalom. So when we say that you're the children of God, you also kind of open up this door that you're the children of peace. And if you seek out God, you're inherently going to be the child of peace. So 100%, it could be that people inherently are more the children of God if you do this. Kingdom of heaven is an attitude, but a child of God, when you think about maybe like why God would have created the world, there would have been like this attitude, I'm creating it for people to thrive, for people to kind of live at peace with one another. The more that you're acting militant towards one another, the less you're able to accomplish. So you're more kind of fulfilling the function of the world, the more that you're able to make it function more successfully. So if you're a peacemaker, you're kind of accomplishing that. And again, I think that's a perfectly fine answer, and made this person, the one who's actively doing something, is more like God.
Yeah. So isn't Judaism a form of peacemaker? Because Judaism believes that they were chosen by God as agents of God. Again, you could probably explain this way better than I do. So isn't Judaism, in a sense, as agents of God, as sons of God? Would that be?
Well, I don't want to be either chauvinist, egotistical, or any of those things. So I think, I was just, when people talk about chosenness, when they talk about more of a mission more than other people, I generally see racist attitudes there. So a lot of times I don't try to investigate like what you're trying to say, that, oh, Jews are supposed to create more peace in the world. I
Well,
think
at
like
least not right now. Okay, I mean, I don't mean now, but I mean in the times of at the times of
definitely not now. I've been
well,
to Israel. And just to putting jokes aside, I think that's one of the problems that people have of Israel, or one of the things that specifically, like, 70% of American Jews vote Democrat. And a lot of times, if you vote Democrat, you're kind of looking for a less of a militant attitude towards the world. A lot of times Republicans are identified as, like, for better or not, for true or not, as more militant. And one of the things that's hard is that if I want to see the Jewish people and live in Israel and thrive, I want to see them thrive with no militancy. I want to see them thrive without this attitude that they have opposites or enemies. I want to pretend they live in some messianic hole. And therefore, Israel becomes a challenge for people, because no one could look at Israel and pretend that it creates more peace in the world. Anyone who looks at Israel honestly will say it might be a place where Jews could run, but no one thinks that, oh, this is the peace haven that's a model for the world to copy. That's what Canada is. Canada is the place where those guys are cold and live peacefully.
Yeah. So no, okay. So my early question was about first century Judaism. Within the Old Testament, right? The Jews were viewed as the chosen people of God, and that was part of theology. And so with this fit.
No, buddy. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying it's racist to like highlight it.
Okay. Okay, I mean, it's okay, fine. So what is the appropriate question to ask then?
What? I'm sorry?
What is it? So what is the appropriate question to ask? If you're saying the question by definition is racist, then what is the proper?
I'm not saying it is racist. I'm saying it can be used racistly.
Yeah, I get that. Well, okay, fine. Never mind. Okay, so
in conclusion, we just see that one of the ideas that we see specifically is that there's an idea that humans are meant to be partners of God. Just like in creation, humans are meant to accomplish either by tending the garden, or humans are, when they sit in proper judgment in the court, you have God in your presence and you're kind of giving like this better ideal. And I think what you see in the idea of peacemakers, that people who are actively seeking peace, they're more being partners with God in the making of the world, in the sustaining of the world, and therefore they're more called, I don't know if that word is children of God, but they're from the line of God. This is like the God family, and I think that's one of the things that we're seeing here. But I do think that this one is very this beatitude is very diametrically opposed to the others, in that the meek of spirit is because he's downtrodden. The peacemaker is because he has a different attitude than everyone else. He's able to see negativity and try to overcome it when others can't. So I think it's a really interesting addition to the Beatitudes in contradistinction to the earlier ones. Okay, that's all I got, Isaac.
Okay. Well, Rabbi, on that note, I think we can call it a day. Thank you, and blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Amen.
Amen, Salah. Okay, have a good day.
Thank you.